All right, so we are now on the urinary system. So, what do you already know about the urinary system in general? So, think urine production, bladders, kidneys, things you've heard of before, right? Maybe if you're diabetic, you pee more. Maybe you've heard about males with prostate problems having difficulty peeing. This is called hesitancy. We'll touch on this towards the end of this lecture. And just think of different things that you've heard before. You've heard of UTIs, urinary tract infections. This lecture will better acquaint you with the structure and function of the urinary system as a whole, and we'll talk about some different diseases therein. So the main organs are the kidneys. They are the excretory organs. So they filter the blood, they get all the impurities out, they filter good blood back, they eliminate all the salts, all the waste, all the water that you don't need. The bladder is next. So the bladder is actually just a storage sac. It doesn't really do anything else. It's a temporary storage for urine until you pee it all out. It's one of the few structures in the body that has what we call transitional epithelium in it because it's so stretchy, and that's what the bladder, does as it holds more and more urine and stretches to a point. Ureters, they are the tubes from the kidney to the bladder, and then the urethra, those are the that goes from the bladder to the exit of the body. Urinary system functions. So this removes waste from the body as urine. It processes 200 quarts of fluid every 24 hours. That's 50 gallons of fluid that cycles through your two kidneys every single day. Out of those 200 quarts, only 2 quarts are urinated out. So where did the rest of the 50 gallons go? Where the rest of the 198 quarts, where did it go? So all of that was reabsorbed back into your body, believe it or not. Lot of fluid movement happening there. So next, the urinary system balances your salts. Sometimes you have too much and you get rid of some. Sometimes you have too much water, and if your body eliminates some salts, water will follow it. Remember, osmosis, water follows salt. It also controls the pH, so how alkaline, or I like to say how basic or how acidic your urine is. The urinary system, it also regulates, or it also releases hormones that regulate your blood pressure with something called renin that we'll talk about a lot. Touched on this in the endocrine chapter. We'll talk a lot more about it here. Remember the endocrine system charts. Here is where we'll talk about it some more. Let's see what else. It produces the active form of vitamin D that maintains calcium for bones and blood. Without it, you don't maintain calcium in your bones or your blood. It also controls the production of red blood cells with erythropoietin, EPO. So this is the millionth time we've talked about EPO, and we're probably not going to stop talking about it. We're definitely going to talk about it more throughout this lecture. Let's talk about what urine actually is. So first of all, the kidneys filter out the entire blood plasma, blood liquid, 60 times a day. So your whole body supply gets filtered 60 times a day. Initially, the fluid that gets filtered out is what we call filtrate. So it's your blood plasma minus your proteins. If proteins, which are really large macromolecules, show up, that means there are big holes in your glomerulus, which we'll talk about a lot. Glomeruli are your filtering units. So think if you're a fisherman trying to catch fish with a net, and you keep losing fish. There's got to be a hole in the net, right? So it's the same idea here. If the glomerulus is damaged, then it's going to let proteins into your urine, and they should not ever show up in your urine. But filtrate, it's just the initial stuff, and it shouldn't have any proteins in it. After all of the electrolyte movement through osmosis and fluid movement, etc., 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 after all of that, you get your final product, which is urine. And urine encompasses less than 1% of the total filtrate. So everything that was filtered out initially, urine is only 1% at most of that. Really, it's less than that. It's less than 1% of all of that. Urine's just mostly the waste in the water that gets excreted. And it's formed through a process of filtration, reabsorption, finally secretion. Some physical characteristics of urine. Urine is supposed to be clear or pale, so it should be clear and look like water in the toilet bowl. The darker that it is, the more urochrome there is. Sometimes though, drugs, vitamin supplements, and diet can change the look of your urine. B vitamins change your urine to highlighter neon yellow, for example. So that happens when you've taken too many vitamin B. If you're drinking a lot of soda, dark caramel coloring can show up. Sorry, I had to pause the video for a second. Where was I? So vitamin B changes your urine to a highlighter neon color. Dark caramel is going to be the color that your urine can show up as if you're drinking a lot of soda. Grape juice will actually turn your urine and your fecal waste green. So this is actually interesting. Grape juice is an indicator for alkalinity, so how basic something is, right? So the opposite of acidic. So if something is more acidic, grape juice would actually be more show up more as pink color, whereas if it's more basic, more alkaline, it's going to turn it green. So if you're drinking a lot of grape juice, your pee and your fecal waste can turn green in some instances. Things that you eat or drink can change the color of your urine. It can also change the smell, which we'll talk about. But to stay in the color scheme, if your urine is cloudy, then you probably have some sort of bacterial infection. Usually it'll be indicative of a urinary tract infection, UTI for short. So don't get cloudy urine confused with any bubbles you might see from peeing really hard and really fast. Give it a few seconds, wait for those bubbles to settle before assessing the color of your urine, right? And everybody should be looking at their urine. It's a good way to gauge whether or not you're hydrated enough or whatever. If you do think that you have a UTI, you're checking for cloudiness, you see cloudiness, you felt some burning when you're peeing, you probably should go to a doctor and get that taken care of. Moving on to odor. So your pee really should not smell bad when you first urinate. If it has a strong smell, then something's not right. It could be something simple like you're dehydrated and your urine's just very condensed. It could also be from holding your pee in for a long time, sitting there in your bladder waiting to be released into a toilet can cause your urine to actually break down into its components, like ammonia. And so sometimes when you do hold it for way too long, it might burn a little while you initially start peeing as well because of that breakdown into its components, like ammonia. And that's not good. That's not good. It's also going to have a stronger odor. So don't do that. Don't hold it in. If you got to pee, go pee. Don't hold it forever. It's not good for you at all. Sometimes different drugs, different vegetables will also make your urine smell bad. Penicillin, amoxicillin, anything illin, that can make your pee smell a little bit moldy, which makes sense, right? Penicillin's originally made from mold. Coffee will make your urine smell. Sometimes coffee will make your urine smell exactly like coffee. Veggie wise, think of different asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower type vegetables. They'll give an odor to your urine, and that's okay. But if you have bad odor without having taken any of these meds or any of these vegetables or having held your pee in for too long, you should definitely go and get that checked out. You might have something else going on. pH. Your pee should be slightly acidic. So if you were drinking a ton of grape juice, maybe it should be, what do we say, pink. So your pee should be slightly acidic. Diet, prolonged vomiting, dehydration, all of these different things can all change your pH. UTIs can alter your pH. Moving on to specific gravity. So those are the solids that are dissolved in your urine. If you let your urine sit in a cup for a period of time, you'll get a deposit at the bottom of the cup. Those are the salts settling out, right? So that's like you put salt in water, let it sit there, the salt will fall to the bottom of the water cup. Same thing here. There shouldn't be a lot of solid in your urine. Sometimes there can be casts, which are what line the tubes in your kidneys. And that's only if there's some kind of damage that you would notice that coming out in your pee. But we'll talk about that. We'll get more into different infections and things like that. So let's look at where the kidneys are located. So they are inferior to the adrenal glands, or the old name suprarenal glands, so supra on top, the renals, right? We don't call that anymore. We say adrenal glands now. Those are the little hats, little cone shapes that are up here on top of the kidneys. Boom, right there, little triangles. Generally, we say that they are lateral to the L2 vertebrae, but they can span from the T12 to the L3. So they can be a little higher or a little lower, but they're going to generally be pretty close to the L2 vertebrae. They are posterior to the peritoneum. That is this white line right here. If we look at the bottom image. So the white line is the lining to the abdominal cavity called the peritoneum. We also say that they are retroperitoneal organs because they sit behind the peritoneum. So we could say that kidneys are located, their location is retroperitoneal at the level of T12 to L3. So remember that, should it show up on a test or quiz. Let's see, the right kidney, so patient right, sits lower than the left kidney. Why? Why do you guys think? So there's a whole lot of liver right here on the right side, which causes that kidney to be slightly lower than the left. Also, if the kidneys were at the same level, then the blood vessels right here branching would also be branching at the same level, which would actually weaken the blood vessels a lot if they branched out right at the same level. I said level a lot, but that's what it is. Let's see, the left kidney is not palpable unless enlarged or descended for some reason. So why is the left kidney not palpable? Think about its location, how it sits higher. So ribs are in the way here. You should not be able to feel the left kidney unless you stick your fingers underneath the rib cage. If you can feel the left kidney, then there is a problem. Either the kidney is enlarged, or the spleen is enlarged and pushing it down, or the liver is enlarged pushing it down. Either way, you should not be able to feel the left kidney. If you are ever asked about what view we're seeing, this top view, we would say frontal or coronal. Bottom view, we would say cross section or transverse. Either one's fine. Let's look at the kidney specifically now. So here we got a real kidney. Here you got a nice diagram of a kidney with everything labeled. So this is pretty good. Juxtapose. Remember the word juxtapose, that'll come up again. But let's look at the kidney. So the cortex is the outside. Remember, cortex outside, medulla inside, middle. So always think middle for medulla. Middle for medulla. That's going to be the best way to remember it. And that's the entire inside, right? So cortex is this outside layer. The medulla is the entire inside. The renal pelvis, so the renal pelvis right there is where everything's funneling from, or it's funneling into. And that's what it looks like on both sides. Everything is coming out of here and into the renal pelvis and out. So that's the last holding spot before it gets to the ureter down here, which is the little tube that heads down towards the bladder. Let's look at the renal pyramids. So renal pyramids are these little triangle shapes. You can find them here and here in a real life kidney. All these little triangular shapes are our renal pyramids inside the renal medulla. They're darker than the cortex, so you can kind of differentiate where the cortex is on the outside and where the renal pyramid begins. We have calyx. So we have minor and major. Calyces if there's more than one. The minors come out right at the tips of the pyramids. So right at the pointy part are the minor calyx. Or minor calyces. And they funnel down into a bigger opening, right? So all of these minor calyces funneling into a bigger opening, that's what we call the major calyx. So this bigger opening right here is the major calyx. Minor calyces, a bunch of them funnel into the major calyx. Then the major calyx funnels into the renal pelvis. So minor to major, major to pelvis. And then renal pelvis towards the ureter, ureter to the bladder, right? Let's see, we have renal columns. They are between the pyramids, between the renal pyramids, columns. Easy enough to remember. Long, skinny between the pyramids. And then the capsule is the outer covering. You can also hear it called the fibrous capsule, but it encapsulates the kidney, right? So it's the outside covering of the kidney. So this is a close-up view of one section of a renal pyramid and its cortex layer. So one thing to note, if you have a large artery, there are going to be tons and tons and tons and tons of little capillaries coming off of it. These little capillaries take the blood flow in and out, right? So with one big blood vessel, you have to have tons of smaller vessels coming off of it. Let's see. We are loaded here with over 1 million small arteries, veins, and capillaries at each of these renal pyramids. Kidneys are going to be loaded with them, right? Off of each of these little branches that you see is going to be a little ball of capillaries called a glomerulus. Glomerulus. You'll get tongue-tied saying that word. Glomerulus. There we go, glomerulus. If I look at it too long, I'll say it wrong. But glomeruli are very significant, and we're going to get even more zoomed in and detailed on those little guys. They will not, you will never see these with the naked eye, by the way. So notice that I said this is a close-up view of the renal pyramid with the cortex. So this little process that we're going to talk about with the glomeruli is going to encompass the cortex and the medulla. Glomeruli, or one is a glomerulus. Glomeruli. Okay, so this is one of the branches from the previous slide with the little ball at the end, right, that I said you wouldn't see with the naked eye. So pretend like we've zoomed in way, way hard to blow it up to show this little ball of capillaries on the end of that little branch called the glomerulus. So first of all, remember afferent means going in, efferent exits. So this would be the afferent arterial. This one would be the efferent, the exit arterial. So the blood vessel of the kidney gets smaller and smaller down to the afferent arterial, going into the capillary tuft or the glomerulus. Because the pressure in the kidneys is higher, substances in the blood that are small enough to pass through the pores and capillary walls get forced out into the capsules. So that right here is going to be another capsule. We call this the Bowman's capsule. So we have a capsule, a fibrous capsule that encapsulates the kidney as a whole, and we have another capsule that covers only the glomerulus. So the one that covers only the glomerulus is called the Bowman's capsule, and that's this right here. Basically, as the blood comes through the afferent arterial, the pressure is high and it's going to squish a lot of stuff out through the little cracks and crevices here. And all that fluid is going to get trapped in the glomerulus. So remember, you have a glomerulus at the end of each branch, and there were millions and millions of branches. So there are millions and millions of glomeruli in the kidneys. So even though each glomerulus is going to take a little fluid out of the blood, it's going to stack up with millions of these overall. So remember, it's 200 quarts or 50 gallons that kidneys cycle through every single day. So the liquid, as it gets through these cracks and crevices and gets captured in the Bowman's capsule, it's going to get shunted down this proximal tube. And we'll get back to that. We'll talk a lot about the proximal tube. So what's left in the blood is going to cycle around, and it's going to go out of the efferent arterial up here at the top. The membrane around the capillaries keeps the proteins from coming out into the filtrate. And then these little guys right here are called podocytes. They're the little purple cells with finger-like projections. So anything pod, think feet, podiatrist is a foot doctor, right? So think of these as like little toes sticking off that leave little cracks to allow small stuff to come through and out of blood, and big stuff to stay in the blood. Like, that makes sense. It's not going to let big stuff through. So now let's look at a little bit of a broader view. So remember the picture of the blood vessels that we just zoomed in on, the ball of capillaries called a glomerulus. Well, there it is pictured here with the Bowman's capsule around it. So this is a glomerulus with the Bowman's capsule. We've zoomed out just a little bit to see what's going on here. So first of all, let's talk about a nephron. It's the structural and functional unit of filtration. There's around 1 million per kidney, and there are two parts. We have the renal corpuscle and the renal tubule. So let's talk about those. So we have the afferent arterial going in. We have the glomerulus here, And then we have the efferent arteriole going out. Right off the side is the proximal tubule that got cut off in the previous slide. Well, here it is. Here is the proximal tubule and what it looks like. In real life, this whole image here is wadded up into a teeny tiny ball, and it's not going to be laid out like this. Everything's going to look like it's on top of each other. But we have spread it out so we can learn about it individually. And this whole section is called the nephron. So everything from the glomerulus to the collecting duct is the nephron. There are over 1 million of these per kidney. So if you have 2 kidneys, there are 2 million of these in your body, and that's how you filter 50 gallons a day. When you have the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule, we call that the renal corpuscle. And then you have the renal tubule. So that's the whole system of all these different tubes. The first part we're going to talk about is called the proximal convoluted tubule. It's proximal because it's the closest to the glomerulus. Distal is going to be the furthest away over here. So after you travel a long way, you get to the distal, the far away one. We call these PCT and DCT for short. Next, you have the thin loop of Henle, or the descending limb of the loop of Henle. And you have a thick loop of Henle, or the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. Thin or descending versus thick or ascending, both are correct, and I don't care what you call it as long as you know the difference. And then distal convoluted tubule, boom, 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 into the collecting duct. You see that this one distal convoluted tubule comes into this one branch of the collecting duct, but you see a bunch of other branches. So those are several DCTs coming in, attaching at one collecting duct. One collecting duct for several nephrons, if you will. Multiple nephrons can and will drain into a single collecting duct. So this works kind of like a still. You put stuff in, you distill it, and you end up with the end product called urine. So now we're going to get into what each of these parts does individually. So let's look at the highlighted section here. So this is the proximal convoluted tubule, or PCT. It resides in the cortex. So look at these blood vessels here. If we're above the blood vessels, we're in the cortex, so on the outside of the kidney. If we are below these blood vessels, artery and vein, we're in the medulla, so the middle, the inside of the kidney. So that's important. Above the blood vessels, cortex; below the blood vessels, medulla. The proximal convoluted tubule, the PCT, is in the cortex. Its job is reabsorption and secretion of water and electrolytes. It has cuboidal epithelial cells. Cuboidal cells are almost always in a ring shape. If you cut the tubules, it's always going to show as a circle. So note that cuboidal cells function in absorption and secretion. So remember that. Cuboidal cells will come back up. So PCT is in the cortex. Second section. So now you've gone through the PCT, the proximal convoluted tubule, and now we find ourselves in the thin segment in the descending limb of the loop of Henle. So here we're crossing from the cortex and getting down into the medulla of the kidney, so towards the middle of the kidney. And we are now within one of the renal pyramids. So imagine a giant triangle-shaped pyramid here. That's where we are, having left the PCT and entered the loop of Henle. So the thin segment, the descending limb of the loop of Henle, is lined with squamous epithelial cells. Squamous epithelium looks like flattened scales, and they have gaps in between that allow things to come and go way easier than cuboidal or columnar cells. It's going to be freely permeable to water, but not salt. So the descending limb of the loop of Henle is going to be permeable to water, not salt. Water can go in and out. So all the big volume of water that just came off the glomerulus and down the PCT, most of that water is getting reabsorbed back into the body here at the descending limb of the loop of Henle. So right here. Remember, your kidneys are reabsorbing 198 quarts of water. So most of the reabsorption is happening here in the thin segment. So now we get to the thick segment, or the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. And that's lined with columnar epithelium. So that's not going to be permeable to water, but salts are pumped out by active transport. So it'll give you the same concentration as before the descending limb. The thin segment took out most of the water. The thick segment's got to take out the salt, so we still have that salt-water balance, right? So water's coming out here, salt's getting moved out here through active transport. So now we have moved on to the distal convoluted tubule. So we've left the renal corpuscle. We've gone down the proximal convoluted tubule through the loop of Henle, up through the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, and we find ourselves in the distal convoluted tubule, back outside of the medulla, back into the cortex, in that rim, in that outer part of the kidney. So we are not in the renal pyramid anymore. We are back in the cortex. We are above the vessels. So this is the DCT, distal, because if you stretch it out all the way, it's going to lead the farthest away. And this is functioning mostly in secretion. There is another function here we'll talk about later. And it's made of cuboidal epithelium. So remember, cuboidal epithelium deals mostly in secretion. Then we have the collecting ducts at the end. So you've got one of these for a bunch of nephrons dumping into the same collecting duct. We have two kinds of cells here. First, we have intercalated cells. They check out your pH balance. They're looking at your acid-base balance. How many hydrogen ions you have and such. So they're making sure pH is where it needs to be. And then we have our principal cells. So our principal cells are our last check on water and salt content. We're looking at water-salt balance. The collecting duct is the last chance for the body to reabsorb any water or any salt that it needs back into the system. Because once this water and salt gets past these vessels, once it's down here at the bottom part of the collecting duct, there's not going to be any more reabsorbing or secreting. That is when we start calling it urine. Your urine is set. Once you get into the medulla with a collecting duct, nothing changes. Nothing changes in the urine. If you're still in the cortex, you can deal with reabsorption of salt or water. Once you're back in the medulla, urine's done. Urine's set. That's it. No more reabsorption, no more secretion. So the bottom part of the collecting duct, it's going to go down and dump into the renal pyramid, which drains into the minor calyx, that drains into the major calyx. The major calyx drains into the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis drains into the ureter. Then from the ureter to the bladder. From the bladder to the urethra, and from the urethra into the toilet. So once you get past these blood vessels, when you're in the collecting duct, nothing's going to change within the urine. Before this, all of that is called filtrate. This entire process throughout this whole thing, passing through the blood vessels into the collecting duct, that's when we officially call it urine down here. Up here, filtrate, 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 urine, urine down here. Let's look at an overview. I know this slide is very, very busy. Remember I said it was like a little wadded up, tiny little ball? Ergo, wadded up, busy, tiny little ball. But you have two types of nephrons. You have cortical nephrons. You have juxtamedullary nephrons. So remember I said juxtapose, remember that word? So juxta means nearby. So think juxtamedullary means near the medulla, nearby to the medulla. If we're looking at this image, remember above the vessels is the cortex, below the vessels we're in the medulla. Cortical nephrons are mostly in the cortex. It's in the name, cortical nephrons, mostly in the cortex. Very, very little is going to be going into the medulla. So they have, what they do have going to the medulla is the short loop of Henle. It's just going to touch into the medulla. The rest of it's going to be happening in the cortex. 85% of nephrons are cortical. Only 15% of them are going to be juxtamedullary. Cortical have a very short loop of Henle, like I just said, peeking into the medulla, barely. Juxtamedullary, they're going to have a long loop of Henle into the medulla. Right? Juxtamedullary, long loop of Henle into the medulla. You can see here how long it is. You can see here how short this one is. So this one's cortical, this one's juxtamedullary. The glomerulus is farther away from the medulla in cortical. The glomerulus is going to be a lot closer to the medulla in juxtamedullary. So juxtamedullary, nearby to the medulla. Glomerulus is closer to the medulla in the juxtamedullary. Now there is also a thing called a vasa recta. And that's a system of blood vessels that goes around the loop of Henle. So notice the cortical nephrons, it's just a loop of Henle. Whereas in the juxtamedullary nephrons, we got all of these vessels circling around the loop of Henle. These vessels, loop of Henle, these vessels are called the vasa recta. Cortical nephrons don't have that. Juxtamedullary nephrons do have that. Okay, so now we're looking at how the nephron helps with blood pressure and with salts. You got the afferent arteriole coming in, as it was in previous pictures. Got the glomerular capillaries, and you have the efferent arteriole exiting the cell. So afferent going in, glomerular capillary, efferent going out. And you got this triangle right here that's formed of these cells. Right here, we're going to call this a triangle of cells for now. So the DCT, the distal convoluted tubule, actually comes up by the afferent arterioles and it curls back. It makes a third side of this triangle, right? So we got afferent arteriole making up one side, efferent making up another, distal convoluted tubules making up the third. So the PCT over here on the right curls down, and then you'll have your descending loop of Henle, your ascending loop of Henle, and then up through the distal convoluted tubules here on the left side of the image, right next to the glomerulus. So anyways, that makes this triangle shape here. Just need to make that make sense with our previous picture. So proximal loop of Henle and up through the distal convoluted tubule to make it make sense why it's on this side all of a sudden. So this little triangle, anyways, made up of the sides with the efferent, afferent, DCT here. That's called the juxtaglomerular glomerular apparatus, or the JGA. I'm going to call it the JGA. I get tongue-tied saying this a million times. So the JGA is between the afferent arteriole, the DCT, and the efferent arteriole. The JG cells line the afferent arteriole, and they are specialized smooth muscle cells that monitor blood pressure as it comes through this blood vessel. So these are just monitoring blood pressure. Remember, JG monitors blood pressure only, but blood pressure is not a function of the JGA. That's gonna be important. We also have these special cells in the DCT. They're called macula densa cells. Their job is to monitor salts in the filtrate as it comes down the DCT. So how much salt content there is. So big picture, you've got stuff moving through and into the afferent arteriole. Most of it gets filtered out as it moves into the PCT. PCT starts dwindling down everything. It's the descending loop. Most of the water comes out on the ascending loop of Henle. Most of the salt comes out. Then you got the DCT. DCT is in charge of looking at the filtrate and determining whether or not we have the correct amount of salt. So JG cells and JG cells and macula densa make up the JG apparatus, the JGA. These are a lot of words, but this is going to be really important. Autoregulation, neural regulation, hormonal regulation. So let's discuss filtration rate changes. So here's what's up. Not everything is going to have the same filtration needs or rates. Rates are speeds at which something's happening, right? There are all kinds of things changing in your body at all times, all the time, whether you're working out, whether you're eating different foods, whether you're drinking a lot of water, whether you're not drinking enough water, whether you're moving a lot, whether you're sitting a lot. You're doing different things daily, which is going to require your body to require different things. And your kidneys are going to change right alongside everything as well. So yes, your kidneys are supposed to take salt out, take out water, but sometimes you need that back, right? So sometimes your blood pressure has gotten too low. You need water back to increase your blood volume, to increase your blood pressure. So there are things the body can do to change how much water and how much salt is taken out at the nephron level. We just talked JGA, right? So first, we're going to talk about autoregulation. So the JGA keeps the pressure in the kidneys the same regardless of the person's blood pressure. So if your whole body blood pressure goes up, you don't want the pressure to go up in your afferent arterioles, because it'll blow up your tiny little glomeruli and you'll soon be dead, right? So the JG cells in the afferent arteriole are in charge of only monitoring the blood pressure. So if the pressure is too high, the size of the blood vessel will dilate. It'll open up to lower the pressure. Remember, constricting, making that vessel smaller, would increase the blood pressure, and that's not what's happening here. That blood vessel is dilating, naturally lowering the pressure. Another one is neuroregulation. So this is with the sympathetic nerves. There are nerves everywhere, including in your kidneys. And those sympathetic nerves cause the afferent arterioles to constrict during exercise, during stress, during fight or flight. And that's going to decrease your urine production. So the last thing that you want to think about during a fight or flight response is having to pee, right? So the sympathetic nerves are going to temporarily constrict those vessels to stop urine production. So now what that also means is that you're going to be stockpiling some toxins in your blood until you can get out that stress level state you're in to cause all of this to happen, right? So good and bad, right? Good in some ways, bad in other. Sorry, I had to get a drink of water. So the third type of regulation to filtration rate changes would be hormonal regulation. So now we're back to the endocrine system. We can just never leave the endocrine system, can we? No, because everything, your whole body works together, right? So all of these things are going to come up multiple times throughout the semester. All right, so the JGA detects low blood pressure in the JG cells of the afferent arteriole, or the DCT says, hey, the macula densa is telling me there's not enough salt in here. So if there's not enough salt or the BP is too low, the blood pressure is too low, we need to change that, right? So how do we fix that? If the BP is too low or the salts are too low, then renin is secreted, which changes angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. Anytime you see ogen, it means to make something. So angiotensinogen makes angiotensin 1. Then angiotensin 1 is going to convert to angiotensin 2. That's going to happen by an enzyme called ACE. What does ACE stand for? Angiotensin converting enzyme. What does ACE do? It converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. So now we have angiotensin 2 to constrict our blood vessels, which is going to cause our BP to increase, our blood pressure to increase. It stimulates the adrenal glands to produce aldosterone, which is going to make you absorb more salt. If you absorb more salts, then you will absorb more water because water follows salt, right? Think osmosis. If you absorb more water, what happens to your blood volume? It increases, right? So more water, more blood volume, higher blood pressure. So we've just fixed the problem. Go over that a couple times till it makes sense to you. Remember this process. Another thing that can happen is your ADH, your antidiuretic hormone, kicks in. So remember, diuretics make you pee. So what do antidiuretics do? Make you retain water. So they don't make you pee, and they make you hold on to water. If you retain water, your blood volume goes up, your blood pressure goes up. So this is very, very cyclical. This is going to come up a lot, and it has come up a lot. And all of these things that we're talking about are going to fix low blood pressure. So constricting your blood vessels, reabsorbing more salts, thereby getting more water, thereby increasing blood pressure, and just not losing the water you had in the first place. So antidiuretic. 3 ways. Those are 3 ways that these hormones help you fix local temporary blood pressure problems. If you're having chronic hypertension, your kidneys are not going to fix that for you. Your doctor will, or changes to your diet or whatever can help with chronic hypertension. These are just different temporary blood pressure fixes that your kidneys can do for you. This is exactly what we just talked about in the previous slide. Here, GFR is glomerular filtration rate, and you can read through these. But we just talked about most of this, so I'm not going to talk about it. If pictures work better for you, then use this to study these different mechanisms. Kidneys, oxygen, and EPO, erythropoietin. So EPO is produced by the kidney and the cortex, between the cortex and the PCT in adults, and in the liver in children. EPO is going to be triggered when your oxygen levels in the blood are too low, and it makes red blood cells produced within the red bone marrow. So if your oxygen is low, EPO makes your bone marrow make more red blood cells so your body can carry more oxygen. Have you guys ever heard of, well, first of all, let's just this is a negative feedback loop. So EPO stimulates red blood cell production so that, they can carry more oxygen in, which increases the oxygen levels. When the oxygen levels are where they're supposed to be, EPO is going to stop stimulating that, right? So negative feedback loop. It starts until you get enough, then it stops. Until you need more, then it starts again. That's what a negative feedback loop is. But anyways, speaking of red blood cell production and carrying more oxygen, have you guys ever heard of blood doping? I am sure most of you have. So let's talk about it. Blood doping is when people shoot up with EPO so that their body can make more red blood cells so that they can carry more oxygen so that their stamina increases when they're playing sports. So that is not legal. That is cheating in sports. But let's talk about what's not illegal. So a lot of elite athletes will actually go up and train in higher elevations because that will cause your body to naturally throw more EPO in to make more red blood cells and absorb all we can absorb. These athletes, they train at high elevations where they have a ton of naturally occurring EPO, higher elevation, lower oxygen, body's gonna make more red blood cells to carry more oxygen to overcompensate for the lack of oxygen up at those higher elevations, so that when they come down to sea level and they compete, they are going to be way more elite and way more efficient with incredible stamina, because now they're in an area with a lot of oxygen. And think about that overcompensation piece, right? They just trained in a really high elevation, low oxygen area. Now they're coming down to a sea level area with plenty of oxygen. They're going to be super soldiers, right? So that is actually very, very legal. Nobody can control where exactly you train. So a lot of Olympic athletes, a lot of people that compete at the CrossFit Games, they will train at high elevations for this reason. But shooting yourself up and blood doping to get the same effect, not legal. Very, very illegal. Training at high elevations, very, very legal. That's allowed. Fun, right? So let's talk about some diseases. Glomerular diseases. So there are primary ones. It's just a glomerulus problem. Any part can break, i.e. your podocytes aren't working right. That's a primary problem. A secondary problem means there's another disease process that damaged this one, and you'll see that a lot. Secondary means something else caused a problem with this part of the kidneys feeling it, right? So we've got diabetes, lupus, hypertension, and bacterial endocarditis. Know the differences in these four, okay? If a question asks which of these, and then it lists out some of these issues, know which secondary systemic problem it is. So let's walk through it. So in diabetes, there's going to be an increase in ACE, the angiotensin converting enzyme. So you have constriction of the efferent arterioles. You have higher pressure in the nephron. Proteins are going to leak out between the podocytes because there's so much pressure. Water follows. All of this is leaking out into the capsule. The proteins, there's nowhere in the looping that can reabsorb the protein once it's in that filtrate. So it's going straight to urine and into the toilet. There's no way to reabsorb the protein. If protein leaks out, water's going to follow, and you're not going to get that protein back. So your urine output is going to increase until your glomeruli are so damaged that they don't work at all, at which point you have decreased filtration, decreased output, and end-stage renal disease. Diabetes, people with diabetes pee a lot initially until their kidneys shut down. Second one, SLE, which is systemic lupus erythematosus, or just lupus. That's inflammation of the glomeruli, which causes proteins to leak out and everything we just said. So inflammation of the glomeruli causes proteins to leak out. Water follows proteins, increased urine output until the glomeruli are so damaged that they don't work at all. Decreased filtration, decreased output, and stage renal disease. Hypertension. Hypertension further increases the pressure in the glomeruli, which causes higher pressure in the nephron, which causes proteins to leak out. Water follows proteins, increased urine output until glomeruli are so damaged that they don't work at all, decreased filtration, decreased output, end-stage renal disease. Moving on to bacterial endocarditis. So this is a bacterial infection of the lining of your heart, which causes inflammation of the glomeruli, usually in children, which causes protein to leak out, water follows proteins, etc., 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 until we reach end-stage renal disease. So the process is the same, but the cause is different. So know the different causes and what the secondary problems are, okay? Because this will be asked on the quiz. Know the difference in these four. So inflammation of the glomeruli causes proteins to leak out. What is the systemic problem? What is the secondary problem? Know the answer. Know the difference between these four. Kidneys, vitamin D, and calcium. So kidneys have vitamin D receptors in the DCT, the distal convoluted tubule. Remember I said the DCT would have another function? Well, here it is. So first is the macula densa cells. They're monitoring the salt in the filtrate. If too low, it makes you reabsorb some. Second is the vitamin D receptors. Vitamin D in the distal convoluted tubule. Remember this. Vitamin D controls the balance of the calcium and phosphorus levels in the blood. So that means the DCT is also involved in calcium and phosphorus levels. Along with parathyroid hormone, which also monitors calcium, vitamin D in the kidneys and parathyroid hormone are going to monitor the calcium and phosphorus in the kidneys. If the kidneys fail, then you're not making vitamin D correctly, and calcium's not going to reabsorb, and you'll have problems because our calcium level's too low. So vitamin D levels are really, really, really important. And a lot of people have vitamin D issues. Quick example, low vitamin D, low calcium, osteoporosis. So if the kidneys aren't working right to monitor calcium levels, parathyroid hormone's going to go nuts and create way too much calcium in the blood. And that's going to settle out in the kidneys as stones. So you're going to have kidney stones. Not great. We don't want this. So basically, the overarching theme here is if one isn't working right, the other overdoes it, and there's no balance, and you end up with issues like kidney stones. Moving on to disorders of water balance, hypotonic hydration. So this is cellular overhydration or water intoxication. This shows up in athletes that are going for long periods of time, like long distance runners or marathon runners. You got to watch how much plain water you drink as a marathon runner. Key there is plain water. With water intoxications, your cells swell up too much. So if extracellular fluid is diluted because you drank too much water, then you have a situation called hyponatremia. So not enough salts. Sodium here specifically. That means that the cells are going to have less water than the outside environment. So water is going to go where? Think osmosis. It's going to go into the cells. So that's going to cause some symptoms: nausea, vomiting, cramps, muscle cramps, and your brain can swell up. Once that happens, you can die. So remember, osmosis, inside, outside, is the same in terms of salt concentration and water. So if you drink too much and the outside is watery, your water is going to go to the more salty, concentrated environment, which right now is inside your cells. So water is going inside the cells swelling up. And if you're doing anything that makes you sweat a lot, you're going to lose both water and salt. So just remember that. Remember osmosis. This is more of the basic bio stuff. If you're performing these elite sports or really long distance running, long marathons, make sure that you are drinking something to replace the water, but also the salt that you're using, so that you don't get into this water intoxication state. Make sure you're drinking something with electrolyte replacement. If you don't like Gatorade and you don't like Powerade, there is electrolyte water now that tastes like water. right? I'm like that. I like electrolyte water more. I feel like Gatorade and Powerade don't satiate my thirst, and some others are like that too. But make sure that you are drinking something that's going to replenish your electrolytes, your salts, because they are very, very important for functioning clearly. So polycystic kidney disease. You've probably heard of polycystic ovary disease. There's a lot of literature about polycystic ovary right now and a lot of stuff in the news about it. But polycystic ovary would actually look exactly like this. All these blistery little bumps and follicles. Here we're talking polycystic kidney disease. So this is a normal kidney. Think about this as a normal sized kidney. And then we have polycystic kidney disease right here. It's ginormous. Obviously, it's not going to function correctly. In kids, this is a recessive disorder. In adults, it's dominant and irreparable, unfortunately. So if you have this condition, you can try and slow the progression, but unfortunately, there's no cure. Which brings us to kidney transplants. If you have a complete kidney failure, you can get a kidney transplant. So up here at the top are your normal kidneys. Notice the right one's a little bit lower than the left. If this patient was getting a kidney transplant, the normal placement of a kidney transplant would be down here in the iliac region. Interesting, right? Doctors would hook this new kidney up to blood vessels and nerves, and you'd be good to go. This donated kidney is probably going to be a right kidney from a donor. So why would the doctor take the donated kidney? Why would they take the right one? Why do you think? What did we say about the left kidney earlier? Harder to get to, right? The left kidney, you'll have to go underneath a bunch of stuff to grab, right? The right kidney is lower and it's easier to get to, and doctors don't have to travel so far under the ribs to get to the right kidney. And yes, a donor can live with just one kidney as long as something doesn't happen to the other kidney. So one kidney is A-okay for the donor, as long as their other kidney stays functioning. Next question, I'm sure the more important one for you guys is, why is the transplanted kidney all the way down here in the iliac region? Oh, why we put it down here? Why is it transplanted anterior to the ilium? So remember that. This kidney has been transplanted anterior to the ilium. Why? Same reason as taking the right kidney, it's easier. So this spot is actually still pretty well protected. It's still hooked up to big blood vessels, but it's a way more simple to put in this way than to have to cut through and try to stick it where the kidney's supposed to go naturally. They hook it up to the vessels, nerves, good to go. Surprisingly, the more difficult step of kidney donation for doctors, for surgeons, is actually removing the right kidney from the donor. Placing it into the patient is relatively simple in comparison. For the professionals anyway. Kidney stones or renal calculi. So these right here, these are not lips. This is a kidney that has been cut open. So you can see the pyramids kind of around here, the renal pyramids. If you squint, you can see them. The image on the right is a 2.5 centimeter long kidney stone. Notice how jagged and rough they are. As they are moving through the ureter and you're trying to pass them, they're going to cut and they're going to tear their way through and they're going to cause spasms and a lot of pain. Imagine trying to pass these bad boys. Look how huge these are. Imagine trying to pass them through your tiny little urethra. That's going to hurt. That's not going to feel great. There are more than one kind of kidney stone. The most common are called calcium oxalate stones. Um, so in your food, there's a chemical called oxalate, which causes calcium to settle out. And when it settles, it makes stones. So a couple things that you can do to prevent stone formation if you're in danger of getting kidney stones is by drinking water and cutting back on oxalate levels in food. So surprisingly, the number one oxalate rich food is spinach. So if you're prone to kidney stones, stay away from things like spinach, potatoes, whole grains, chocolate, corn, all the things that make you happy. You got to stay away from those. It's not really fun to stay away, but it's probably going to be better than trying to pass one of these bad boys regularly through your urinary tract, right? Would not feel good. I have not had one. I don't want one. So kidney stones, they form in the renal pelvis. For some people, it can be due to chronic bacterial infections or UTIs. You can have bacteria and calcium and all kinds of stuff working together to make these stones. Something else that can cause this to happen, if you have to pee but you don't go when you need to, calcium can settle out before you have a chance to pee it out. So when you do need to pee, go pee so that there's not a chance for the stuff to settle and not get removed while in its tiny little forms. Increased calcium in your blood can also cause this to happen. Too much parathyroid hormone can cause kidney stones. If your pH is too high, if you're too alkaline, or as I like to say, if you're too basic, that can cause kidney stones. Too acidic would actually dissolve the stone, so you're not going to be very likely to form stones at a pH that's too acidic in urine. Horseshoe kidney. This is a really interesting one, and these are usually found by accident. So let's say somebody had chronic UTIs one after another. Doctors cannot figure out why. They decide to see what's going on. They do a test called a KUB, kidney urinary bladder. They put some dye in, see where the dye goes, and wait, what's that dye going around? Horseshoe kidney. Only one kidney that's connected and horseshoe shaped. Wild, weird, crazy. But 99% of the time it's completely fine. However, because you only have the one oddly shaped kidney, you can't exactly remove it. So it's a really interesting situation overall. So if there's anything that goes wrong with that kidney, there would be some problems. But as long as that kidney, your horseshoe kidney's fine, you're actually going to be fine. Ectopic kidney, you've heard of ectopic pregnancy, so a pregnancy where it doesn't belong. You can have a kidney where it doesn't belong. That's ectopic kidney. For instance, this person got a KUB done, and their kidney was way down here in the pelvic region. As long as it's functioning and has good blood supply, it'll probably be fine. But the placement could cause problems with something else. So think about it being all the way down here in the pelvis. What could happen? Think about when something else sits on a pelvis, like a baby. What happens to pregnant ladies? They got something right on top of their bladder, right? So this kidney is probably sitting right on top of a bladder. What's happening? Probably peeing all the time. So usually some kind of other issue is taking place that clues doctors in on needing extra tests run, and these extra tests can reveal things like odd placement for a kidney. All right, this next section of slides is going to be pretty fast, and that'll end our urinary chapter. So we have the urinary bladder. It's a muscular sac with temporary storage of urine. It's also retroperitoneal, so it's not inside the peritoneum, and it's not inside the peritoneal cavity. It's outside, just like the kidneys are. It's way down the pelvic floor, way down the pelvis. In males, there's a prostate gland that circles the neck at the bottom of the bladder. So an enlarged prostate will press in on the urethra, and it'll make it harder for males to go pee. They'll go to urinate, and initially nothing comes out. We call this hesitancy or hesitation. And then when something does and it doesn't drain out completely, that can open the door for UTIs. In females, it's anterior to the vagina and uterus, but when pregnant or if pregnant, the uterus comes forward and lays right on top of the bladder, which, like that previous slide indicated, puts more pressure on the bladder, makes you urinate more. The urethra, you have a couple of sphincters in the urethra. You have the internal urethral sphincter, so that one is involuntary. That's where the urethra hooks to the bottom of the bladder. And you have an external urethral sphincter. That one is voluntary, so that's the one that you control when you're holding it before you can get to the bathroom to go urinate. This one can get weak if you cough a lot or if you're pregnant. It can cause incontinence, so peeing on yourself. In males, the urethra is for semen and urine, and in females, it is for urine only. So the average total body water of a 150-pound male is 40 liters. So extracellular fluid is everything outside of the cells. That's all these fluids in your body added together. Interstitial, plasma, lymph, cerebrospinal fluids, synovial, peritoneal, pleural, pericardial, humors. Remember, humors are blood. Bile, digestive fluids, urinary fluids, respiratory fluids. All of that is extracellular fluid. You undergo osmosis. So if you have high salt concentration, water will flow to those areas. You lose 2,500 milliliters a day in urine. You lose 2,500 milliliters a day in urine, feces, breath, sweat, skin, transpiration. Transpiration is just water vapor escaping your body. Osmoreceptors, they detect that water level in your body, so that's in the hypothalamus, so antidiuretic hormones retaining water, and in your cerebral cortex, which is thirsty. I need more water. I need to drink more. Cerebral cortex is telling you you're thirsty. All of this is a negative feedback loop, as we talked about earlier. So you need some, you get some until you got enough, then you stop making some, then you need some more, so you make some of something. That's all negative feedback loop. Here you're dehydrated, your blood pressure drops, your renin increases, angiotensin II stimulates osmoreceptors, which make you not salivate as much, to retain fluids, which give you dry mouth. Osmoreceptors in your cerebral cortex say, hey, you're thirsty, so you drink water, and this is a negative feedback loop. It's going to start over again when you dehydrate again, for example. Here we go to the ADH route with the thirst circle or thirst cycle. ADH route also goes to not filtering out so much salt, cause you reabsorb more water, reducing your urine volume, so you hold on to more water. And it starts over and over and over and over and over again. You get as much as you need until you don't need whatever anymore, and it'll start over as a negative feedback loop dictates. Negative feedback loops, they just counteract changes to maintain stability in a system. Fluid deficiency, you got hypovolemia and dehydration. Hypovolemia is losing water and salt. Dehydration, you're losing more water than salt. So there's a difference there. Water and salt loss with one, more water than salt loss in the other. We already talked about water excess. Watch your water balance, especially if you participate in things like distance running. Make sure you're replenishing your electrolytes. So different kinds of electrolytes you have in your body. Sodium is a really important one. It's important for the cell membrane, for nerve and muscle function. It's a primary one in extracellular fluid. And you need a half a gram a day, so 500 milligrams a day of sodium intake. Aldosterone is a salt-retaining hormone. It affects the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and the cortical duct. Antidiuretic hormone comes from the posterior pituitary gland, and it forces you to conserve water. The natriuretic peptides inhibit salt and water reabsorption, so it makes you get rid of water. And it keeps you from starting renin to keep your blood pressure low. And then angiotensin II increases salt, so it increases water and increases blood pressure. Estrogen sometimes mimics aldosterone, which makes you retain water. So think about when you're on your period. If you're a female and you're having a period, you have more water retention because estrogen is mimicking aldosterone, making you retain water. Yay, water retention. Progesterone, it has a diuretic effect, so you pee more. So progesterone is one of those pregnancy hormones. Think pregnancy, got to pee a lot. Progesterone, diuretic effect. Water is leaving me. Glucocorticoids, these are from your adrenal glands, cause sodium reabsorption, and then water follows, and you urinate less. And then the last slide, looking at potassium, which is the primary electrolyte of the intracellular fluid, so the ICF inside the cells. Sodium is going to be more important outside of the cells. Potassium is most important inside of the cells. So this helps with creating heat, making proteins, making aldosterone in the adrenal cortex. You excrete potassium and reabsorb sodium. So these are both positive ions, and you got to swap them out through active transport. We call this sodium potassium pump, but we're not in biochemistry, so I'm not going to harp too much on the sodium potassium pump. Just know it's an active transport mechanism. Too much potassium is called hyperkalemia. That can cause heart attacks. Too little potassium is called hypokalemia, and that can cause irregular heartbeats. So potassium affects the heart, whether it's too high or too low. So you want to keep potassium levels just right. And that's all for this.